years also. This is where I said we'd revisit the apartment conversation, because you can see, if I start with the green line, which is towards the bottom, or the lowest of the three, it's the single family attached. That would be like townhouses, and 2016 represents the highest of all of the years identified there, so at least back to 2004. The next line is red. The red line represents multifamily housing, which is apartments. And you can see it's got a fairly significant spike. And that spike happens in this year. It's a factor of a lot of economic pieces. The fact is there's a lot of apartments out there or being constructed out there this year. The interesting trend to this, though, is if you look back historically, although this spike is much higher than prior years, it was always a 3-year trend. If you look back starting in 2005, there was an increase. It spiked in 2006, dropped right back down to nearly nothing in 2007, remained that way for a year, then it spiked back up, a 3-year period of growth, then it dropped back down, it just repeated itself until essentially we got to the post-recession period, and then it's altered a little bit. Okay. And the last one is the blue line, which represents single-family detached housing, and for the current year, you see the number 612. Again, that represents the highest number of completion units since 2006. So from a growth standpoint, this is all headed in a positive direction from an economic growth, I should say, position. The next slide is new this year. We wondered how accurate is all this information. Don asks developers, he has access to the master plan, obviously, so you can see how many units are planned on their housing units. And he asks the developers, how many do you plan to build this year? He asks this throughout the winter, by the way. How many do you plan to build in, for example, 2016? And they give him a number. How many do you plan to build in the next 3 years? And they give him a number, an estimate. And how many do you anticipate building in the next 5 years? And they give him a number. So what we did is went back and looked on an annual basis, not the 3-year or 5-year projection, but on an annual basis, how accurate are they? Are they just, this sounds, I'm not trying to make fun, but are they just getting a number to us so that we stop asking? Or are they really putting some thought behind it and trying to give us good information? Because there's no requirement for them to give us anything, essentially. So this shows you that with regard to single-family detached homes, at least of the 3 housing units, it's the highest accuracy rate. And that's pretty good, considering this goes back to 2007 and encompasses the recessionary period, which were at the beginning of that period, they were significantly overestimating how many housing units they were going to build until I'm going to say reality kind of hit, and they had some experience inside of the recession, and it scaled back tremendously, both their activity and their projections. So anyways, this slide is just to show that they've been accurate about at a 93% rate with regard to single family homes, 75% with regard to apartments, and 74% with regard to townhome type structures.
Mr. Murray, since this is you go back to that slide, please. 07 to 15, and this is a new slide. 93% accurate. It could be 93% on the top side and 93% on the bottom side. Were they underestimating or overestimating through those years?
Since this is an aggregate over those years, there's a little bit of both.
Okay.
There's, for the most part, it's been a little bit under, so they've fallen a little bit under their estimates. But there were a couple of years where they were a little bit over. But that's not identified here because it's aggregate over time.
We didn't have any really wide variances.
Only the first year of the recession.
Okay.
When they had, you can remember back when there were, I don't keep up with the industry tremendously, but there used to be a lot of what were called spec homes out there. If you build it, they will come concept. Build some houses and contracts will be let soon thereafter. that practice was halted, and there were only houses that were constructed after contracts were let on them. And that hasn't changed a whole lot since then. There may be a couple out there, but I think they're generally model homes, not spec homes. Next slide, next couple slides deal with construction, commercial construction. Colorado Crossings, probably one of the more significant ones inside of our school district, because it seems to never change. It's sat there for quite a while now. There was a little bit of, I'll use the word excitement around it a couple of months ago, because there was going to be a contract in place, and that has since fallen through also. I think that may have even hit the newspaper. But essentially it still sits in an unknown territory. It just remains with no plans at this point. The Great Wolf Lodge is that hotel, originally hotel, now hotel and water park at Interquest, and you could just visually see the activity that's happening there, and it's getting closer and closer to opening. Should happen actually in calendar year, it was supposed to happen in calendar year 2016. The Colorado Grand Hotel, that one's been on here also. There hasn't been any activity, at least visibly, happening with it. Not sure where it's actually going to go. Many small commercial developments are happening near the Bass Pro area. One of them being Chick-fil-A. If you can think of Interquest and Voyager, in the southwest corner of that intersection, there's essentially a couple hotels back off the intersection a little bit. In Ball Seals in that area, general area. There's an Interquest Commons piece going there, which is office commercial. The Highlands in Briargate, the Highlands at Briargate. Shops and restaurants, that's what as many of you know my background and my interests, I refer to that as the Little League area. That's where the two Little League ballparks were removed, and essentially from there, from the south, from Research South on the south side to Briargate Parkway on the north side. That whole area is the Highlands at Briargate, and as you can see, the only activity that I've witnessed there is the removal of the ballparks, nothing additional. Development at the intersection of Northgate and Voyager, so moving towards the north part. Again, kind of in that Bass Pro area, but on the other side of Voyager. Sprouts, there's a Sprouts Market there now. It is open for business, and Ace Hardware is up and moving, as well as the rest of the strip mall. Black Squirrel Office Park is off of Voyager and Ridgeline, and again, it's office space, a bank and some restaurants and space. Overdrive Raceway, I have actually visited. It is open. I don't know if both levels are open, but when I visited there, at least the bottom level was open. It's actually 2 stories. There's 2 levels of racetrack in there. That's in the Bass Pro area. Mountain Vistas at Briargate, another office development. Academy Gateway is a commercial piece at Northgate and Struthers Road. That's an interesting one because that's at the kind of the south entrance, if you will, to Glen Eagle. Where that property's been vacant for a long, long time with no activity. The Come and Go is just up the road from us here. The View House restaurants, we put this one on there because these are starting to pop up now. If you're driving up I-25 through the DTC area and you look to the east of I-25, there's a View House there. There's one going to be built now here at I-25 in Woodman, northeast portion of that intersection. There's a bank that's going to convert to a medical office building. Taco Bell is coming, a new dental office, and some additional retail space at Briargate Crossing. Now, looking at this report, as I said, Don works on this through the winter months, waits for the data for quite a while. It comes in slowly, and then starts putting pieces of this report together early in the summer. So you see in green down here, after he finished with some of that, there's been some more recent pieces that he just added. The Yellowwood Office Park at Woodman and Yellowwood, the CVS Pharmacy, there's a storage unit going in at Highway 83 in Northgate, a Wendy's and Brew Pub has been added now to the Bass Pro area. By the way, I'd remind you that the Bass Pro area is all inside of the TIF, what we call the TIF. I don't know how you say this really, COSO2 data center is kind of falling in line with some other data centers that are moving into that Interquest and Federal Drive area. And then the Children's Hospital near the Memorial North Hospital site is in there also. Before I move on to the next slide, I do want to remind you that funding for, Mr. Kelly mentioned it earlier, funding for school districts in Colorado works differently than funding of, he mentioned a library one time, library district, or a fire district, or a water district, or even a city or county who has a property, any jurisdiction that has a property tax. As those jurisdictions levy a tax, it is limited by Tabor, so it can't grow indefinitely. But as the tax base grows, their tax rate against that tax base produces additional revenue. And that's how they keep up with growth. Because as the tax base grows, there's additional revenue and they can fund the growth. School district finance in Colorado does not work that way. School district finance in Colorado is a formula set by state statute. And that formula is a maximum that any school district in Colorado can receive. That maximum is made up of generally 3 basic components: local property tax, local specific ownership tax, which is a vehicle tax, and what I call state backfill, state equalization. It's really state funding. And essentially the top, if you think of a bucket, right? The state statute defines our bucket, it limits it, and as dollars pour in from local property tax and specific ownership tax, the remaining amount is filled by the state. So as more and more growth happens in our district and we collect more local property tax dollars, right, the result of that isn't more dollars. It just means the state offsets it dollar for dollar. So every dollar we increase in revenue, they decrease their contribution to our bucket by that same dollar. That's the difference between how school districts are funded in Colorado and many of the other taxing jurisdictions with regard to property taxes. Yes, ma'am.
What about, I believe it's the Gallagher Amendment that specifically deals with commercial taxes?
It has more to do with the assessment rate. So, for example, I'll use an easy example. Right now in Colorado, Gallagher has established, it's a 45-55 split essentially between residential and non-residential property taxes across the state. Not in our school district, but it's an aggregation of across the state. If the market value placed on your property by the assessor is $100,000, your house. What Gallagher has done is established 2 assessment rates, one for residential properties, one for non-residential properties. The assessment rate for residential properties is 7.96%. Think of assessment as tax value. It's the value of your property for tax purposes. So if your house is market valued at $100,000 and you apply the 7.96% assessment rate to it, that brings the $100,000 down to $7,960 for tax purposes. Then whatever the tax levy is of the taxing jurisdiction, it's applied against that $7,000 number, not the $100,000 number. For commercial properties, it's a different number. It's 29%, not 7.96%. But as time goes on, Gallagher was supposed to essentially keep residential property values for tax purposes down. There's a conflict, and I won't go into all the details, between that and Tabor though, because the last several years, the residential assessment rate was supposed to maintain this rate in the Constitution. The residential rate was supposed to go up to maintain that 45-55 split. However, the legislature doesn't feel they have the authority to increase the assessment rate from 7.96 to something else higher, because Tabor requires, it would be considered a tax increase, even though it's a tax rate, but it still would effectively increase taxes. So they're not acting on it because they feel Tabor would require it to be a vote of the people, and they're not willing to put it on the ballot because who would vote support of something like that? Essentially, you're self-imposing a property tax increase indirectly across every residential property in the state. So you hear about the conflict between Gallagher and Tabor, that's one of them. There are others, but is that enough?
Yes.
Too much?
Yeah, no, but it just illustrates how the two have acted as a real stifling.
Well, I really think it's an important thing for taxpayers to understand, because I do get the question quite often, especially now, there's a bond question on the ballot, is why do you need to do this? There's so much growth happening. Doesn't that pay for itself? In other words, you get more money from that growth. The fact of the matter is, we get more local money, and we get then less state money, because it still has to fit within that formulaic maximum. Okay.
Thank you.
The next areas have to do with this residential growth, more specifically. Excuse me. This chart represents units, residential units, not students. And these are the areas, or the neighborhoods, if you will, that would have the most impact. This does not represent every development that's out there, but these are certainly the most major of all of them that are out there. So as you can see here is 3 columns: single family detached, single family attached, and multifamily. So again, that's single family detached, or call the typical neighborhood home. Single family attached are apartments, multifamily, are townhomes, and multifamily are apartments. You can see that there's thousands of units still out there. By the way, this is based on the current master plan. So as the master plan stands today, every year there are amendments to the master plan changing densities, or asking to change a single-family detached plan to include some apartments or townhomes, or even sometimes converting it to commercial.
Mr. Gregory,
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
not familiar with Sterling Ranch. Where is that?
Sterling Ranch is I'll call it southeast part of the district. If you can picture Woodman and Volmer,
Yes.
all that activity that is happening kind of along Volmer Road. Smaller, I shouldn't say smaller, higher density units, so more houses per acre than you'd find in many other places in the district.
But it must be right on the boundary, because
It is. Part of it's in District 49. It encompasses 2 school districts.
thank you.
Most of it, though, happening inside of ours.
Okay.
This chart represents, I'm going to jump to the bottom part of it, the student yield. And really, Don creates these slides, but I would call it student yield rates. We use them as our calculations for standards, but they're really the rates that exist. And you can see single-family detached houses. Each house across our district, we plan, will produce 3/4 of a kid. And you can see to the columns left of that, how much of that 3/4 of a student is elementary, and how much of that 3/4 is middle, and how much of that 3/4 is high school. The same for townhomes, and apartments. Otherwise, you have to use some sort of formulaic piece to do projections. And I should say, within the next 12 to 14 months, we're updating these yield rates also to see if they've changed or will change over time. And nowadays, it's much easier with GIS mapping systems. We can even do it not as a district-wide standard, but possibly a neighborhood standard or a geographic area standard. West of I-25, east of I-25, for example, or east of Powers, or north of Voyager, or whatever it is. We can do it with more granularity these days. But these numbers are important because they're applied against developers' projections. The next slide.
Mr. Gregory, do you think you'll be able to take and overlay housing values, whether you use market value according to the tax assessor or something to be able to say, in this price range, the standard conversation is usually $300,000, $400,000 house, $250,000 house, a little bit younger, at least in this district, $400,000 to $500,000 house, the kids a little bit older, so on and so forth, just because of life stage. Will you be able to overlay all of that information?
I believe the answer is yes, because I think, frankly, I'll speak for myself, I believe that it makes a difference. For a family that buys a $600,000 or $700,000 home in our district, the yield rate for that type of housing may surely be different than a $250,000, $300,000 home, or age of kids may be different, which is, I think, what we're guessing is that if you look at our school district, even those yield rates, we tend to get more older kids than we do younger kids over time. Different than some school districts, because many school districts have a lot of younger kids. We think that's a reflection of housing prices in our district, because Lewis Palmer School District to the north of us is similar, has a similar demographic happening. I would also add on to that, Mr. Strebe, not just housing, but age. I've asked for age of house, original construction age, to be overlaid on top of it also. So it may be related to cost or the price of home, but it could be another factor that we can dig a little deeper into. We wanted to show this slide just as an example of something we could handle internally. The title of it is Review of Student Yield Standard for Apartments. There was a question asked in our community about how many kids come from apartments. Remember this slide? That's what generated the question, right? My gosh, how are we going to have schools for all these kids and all these apartments that are being built? Because it's well over 1,000 units for apartments. So the question naturally was, how many kids are going to come out of these apartments? So we started investigating a little bit, and I know this is tiny print for those in the audience. I apologize. Don's not here, so I'll shoot at Jeff. He uses spreadsheets to the really small font. But the idea here was, what would our, that's right, what would we plan on these apartments producing? So we looked at some recent apartment complexes that were built and applied our yield rates to them versus diving into our infinite campus system and actually seeing how many kids come out of these apartments, regardless of what school they choose to go to. That didn't matter. It was how many students. So on the left, you can see the names of the apartment complexes we reviewed: Peaks at Woodman, Pasco, PU21, North Point Apartments, Academy Manor, Advenir at Briargate, Parkett Academy, Bucota Villages, so on and so on. Next sets of columns apply our yield rates to them. The next set of columns says anticipated students. So I'm just going to read through those. The top one, that Peaks at Woodman, was 230 units, was supposed to produce 17 students. If you look to the right of that, it actually produced 15 students. Okay? So it wasn't, our yield rate missed by 2 kids. Over projected by 2. The next one, we projected 23 students, it produced 10. Again, we over projected. The next one, we projected 19 students to come out of there, 31 students will actually come out of there. And so on and so on. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see down to the bottom where those totals. We projected 150, and it was over 280 that actually came out of there. Now it varies complex by complex. Could have to do with age, cost, all those kind of things. But what it did is make us look back at our yield rates and say, how close are we? Are they still reliable to use? And in the big picture, yes, they're still reliable, but it also led us to the discussion about maybe it's time to review the whole shooting match. It's hard. Apartment complexes are easier for us to do. Townhouses and homes, it's a little more massive undertaking, and we don't have the ability to do that. So we're getting some help with that. Okay. The next slide is new residential projections from those major developments we talked about earlier. The developments are Cordera, North Fork, The Farm, Wolf Ranch, and Flying Horse. You can see the single-family detached units remaining out there. It's 10,703. That's a combination of all of them. And you can see so that units remaining is as of, let's call it today. You can see what they plan to build in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. So this is the question I referred to earlier. Don asks about how many units do you plan to build in each year for the next 6 years? And you can see that they plan to build in Cordera 615 single-family detached units. And that's not all of them, because there's still 376 remaining out there. This gives you an idea that in the single-family detached category, over that next 6-year period, there's 3,765 homes that developers said that they would plan to be built, single-family detached. Single-family attached over that same period is 240, and multifamily, which is the apartments, is 675. Obviously, because most of them apparently are being built this year, based on a prior graph. So now what does that mean for students? So we look at it by attendance area. So this is high school attendance area. The Discovery Canyon attendance area, which remember includes Discovery Canyon Elementary School, Antelope Trails Elementary School, Da Vinci Elementary School, Discovery Canyon Middle Schools, and Discovery Canyon High Schools. You can see the projection using those yield rates against what developers said they would build or anticipate building would produce 367 elementary, this is through 2021, 367 elementary students, 183 middle school students, and 245 high school students. Remember, the 367 elementaries are across 3 different elementary schools. Also remember that when new schools are built, there are new boundaries drawn. So there's a balancing impact through that study also. That's Discovery Canyon. The next one is the Liberty area. And right underneath the top of the title, you can see the schools that it includes. So Liberty High School attendance area includes elementary schools of Explorer, part of Frontier, part of Pioneer, Prairie Hills, and Ranch Creek. Timberview is the middle school, Liberty is the high school. So from essentially the Wolf Ranch / Sterling Ranch area, for elementary students, those numbers would produce 528 students. Middle school age students out of that same area would be 264, and high school students 352. You've seen these numbers before, just so you know. The difference is when you saw them before, 2015 was a projection. 2015 is now a known, so this is just now taking the developer's information and projecting forward from there. And I'll remind you, these are the numbers that you saw when you were discussing the need and location for new elementary and middle schools. The last one on here is Pine Creek. Pine Creek elementary schools include Wolford, Mountain View, and Chinook Trail. Middle school is Challenger. The neighborhoods are generally Cordera and the development right next to Pine Creek High School, which is North Fork. And you can see the number of elementary students planned over the next 6 years to be generated is 473, middle school 238, high school 316. I also tell you this, these are build dates, right? How many homes do you, as the developer, think will be built in 1 year or in any given year? That doesn't say how many do you think you will sell in that year. So, some of these may defer a while. Some of them are going to have kids, some of them aren't going to have kids. There's going to be boundary changes. So it's not a static set of data. It's not going to work as nicely as what we'd like. They're not puzzle pieces that we can just move around. Kids don't come to us at the right grade levels, where we have seats available, or at the right schools where we have seats available. So here's a summary page. Gives the same information as prior. The difference here is it adds which sites are available to relieve or to build schools at. So in the Discovery Canyon area, the elementary site that would be available to the board is in the farm. The Liberty High School area for elementary would be in Wolf Ranch to the east. We've been referring to that as the K-12 site. That's at Research and Black Forest. There is another site in Wolf Ranch. If you were to go out to where the dog park exists today, the Wolf Ranch, stand and look to the north. You see a tree line where the trees start. And that Wolf Ranch north site borders those trees. So it's on the very north end, still on the west side of Black Forest Road. The last one is Coomber